These are the do-nothing liberals who really, quite honestly, are usurping. I mean, this is basically tyranny by the majority. I mean, normally impeachment, every other time in our nation's history, has moved forward on a bipartisan note, and even Nancy Pelosi herself said it should, and now it's totally. In fact, the only bipartisan piece of this is against it.
You're listening to Code Red with Secure America Now, the largest national security grassroots army.
Mark Green is a medical doctor, a graduate of West Point, a patriot, and a congressman from the great state of Tennessee. Welcome, Congressman Mark Green.
Thanks, glad to be on the show.
Today, the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives placed before the House a vote, or they're going to place the vote, on whether to impeach President Trump. In your opinion, did the House hearings on impeachment produce evidence of impeachable offenses by President Trump?
No, not at all. First, on the accusation, the accusation, I'm very comfortable with our president looking into corruption from a previous election. I'm very okay with our president looking into corruption of public officials, whether or not a vice president used his office to get his son special favors from foreign government. I'm very okay with that. So from the accusation standpoint, I don't have a problem. From the proof standpoint, I don't think there was any proof of anything. At best, we got presumption by a witness who overheard a phone call. So I don't think that there's any proof of any crime, and I don't think the accusation in and of itself is bad.
So is it fair to call this action a political action rather than a serious prosecution?
Oh, I think they are going by the Constitution, abusing the Constitution and their power as the majority, and it is, beyond that, it is I guess you would say an indictment. Technically, I don't think that the House can actually make a ruling on the merits. They make an indictment to the Senate, and then the Senate hosts the trial. But it's, I would say the process itself is illegitimate. The way they've gone about it violates House rules. It's totally and completely unfair. But they are doing that impeachment piece per the Constitution.
In today's Washington Post, columnist Mark Dyson wrote, and I'm going to quote from his column today, "Yet these past few weeks have arguably been the best of Trump's presidency, not despite impeachment, but in no small part because of it." Then he goes on to talk about the president's replacement of NAFTA, his first phase conclusion of the deal with China, or trade deal with China. Our booming economy is lifting wages and slashing income inequality. And would you agree with this assessment that in fact that there's a whole lot being done by this administration and by the Senate, the Republicans in the Senate, especially in terms of judicial approvals, that there is really a great deal being done away from the impeachment issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Despite 3 years of a blistering first Russian collusion, deep dive, $35 million, multiple attorneys digging in and under every rock, finding nothing, that they've essentially been impeaching this president from day one, and he's probably been the most productive president in the history of America. What's happened with unemployment, with the economy in general, the stock market, these aren't rich people. We're talking about retirees, school teachers whose pensions have gone through the roof because the stock market is up. And this is helping every single American. And, you know, he's had a fantastic run. As far as, you know, Thiesen's article this morning and whether or not this is the best weeks of the president, I actually think this is going to wind up being a badge of honor, because you have to look at who is it that's taking him to task on this. These are the do-nothing liberals who really, quite honestly, are usurping. I mean, this is basically tyranny by the majority. I mean, normally impeachment, every other time in our nation's history, has moved forward on a bipartisan note, and even Nancy Pelosi herself said it should, and now it's totally. In fact, the only bipartisan piece of this is against it. So it's, you know, I think it's tyrannical what they're doing, and they just recently completely disregarded the Supreme Court. You know, the Supreme Court on Article 2 of the impeachment articles, which was about the president saying people can't testify, the Supreme Court has decided to take that lower case up. So that means the Supreme Court has decided to rule on this, and they're not waiting on the Supreme Court. Supreme Court be damned. We're going forward with impeaching this president. I mean, this is tyranny.
Well, the people who are going to be listening to this podcast, including myself, agree with you that it is a shameful abuse of power by the Democrats in the House. And in addition to impeachment, there was also news this week about very serious wrongdoings by the FBI and by the use of the FISA court. Can you comment on that? I know that you serve on the Homeland Security Oversight Committee. What is your take on the subpoenas that were issued by the FBI and by the activities of this law enforcement agency?
Well, very clearly, it was, at a minimum, there was a crime committed in falsifying documents in order to get the FISA court. So we know for a fact that multiple errors were made, and then there were crimes committed. So Mr. Durham is, you know, deeply investigating that piece of it, and his mandate is much larger than Horowitz's very narrow IG investigation. So I think we're going to see. You now see Comey and I think it was Brimmer that came out and said, start backpedaling, and the FBI was wrong, and the FISA court itself. I saw the Wall Street Journal today actually issued a condemnation of the FBI. Now this is the FISA court condemning the FBI for its incredible mismanagement, misjudgment, potentially criminal acts. So I think a lot more is coming out of this. It's incredibly concerning to think that our government could have been manipulated to surveil an American citizen during a campaign for president. I mean, I just think that's egregious, the idea of it, and that it's based on a falsehood, a manipulated document. I mean, this is huge, and we all are looking to Mr. Durham. And it's funny, you know, the mainstream media didn't publish hardly a word of Senator Lindsey Graham's Judiciary Committee hearing with Mr. Horowitz, where Mr. Horowitz very clearly corrected the media. This is a big deal. You know, they brushed it all off as if it was nothing. But of course they didn't put any of that out there. So they're as guilty as the House majority.
You know, Congressman, during your stellar career, you had the auspicious experience of spending a night in jail with Saddam Hussein. Not that you were a criminal, but that you were someone.
Yeah, I'm proud of that.
I know. But Can you give us a capsule assessment of your time that you spent with Saddam Hussein after he was captured by American forces?
Yeah, sure. I was the physician for the Special Operations Task Force that was hunting for WMD and hunting for Saddam and Saddam enablers, regime members, things like that. I did tons of different missions, capturing various people and, looking for WMD. And so, of course, I was there when we got Saddam Hussein. And when I went back to the interrogation facility where he was, the commander of the unit, a Navy admiral, former Navy SEAL, basically said, "Hey, Mark, I want a physician to stay with this guy. Don't let him martyr himself. Do you want to go in and stay the night with him?" I'm like, "Heck yeah." And so I go in with the purpose of letting him sleep, and I'll just, watch and make sure he doesn't harm himself. Well, Saddam sits up and just starts a conversation with me. And the conversation lasted, it was probably 6 hours or so. It was fantastic, unbelievable opportunity to be there on the night of his capture and interview him and talk to him. I just asked various questions about history. I had to stay away from the legal case against him. I couldn't ask about WMD or anything like that, but I asked about his first coup attempts, and why he invaded Kuwait, why he started the Iran-Iraq War, those kinds of things. Unbelievably life-changing for me, and of course, the beginning of his many interrogations in captivity.
There is, I remember from an interview that you gave that you talked about what came across as the humanity of Saddam Hussein, and having studied dictators and some really the activities of some kind of horrendous people like an Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin, there was also part of these monsters, part of their personalities also included some very humane aspects as being what we would call normal human beings. And what was your take on Saddam in the sense of the man, not just the dictator?
Well, I don't want to say that he was human in any way, other than to say that he was very charming in his interactions with me. He was an evil, maniacal person. I mean, he killed so many people. He used mustard gas on at least one of his own villages, up in the Kurdish regions. That image of the dead mother clasping her dead baby infant in her arms after that village was gassed. I don't think of Saddam at all as a human, but I will say that he was incredibly charming, which I would think evil, that's kind of the way evil is. It's not, you don't get a sense of evil. You get an allure, you get a trick, and in the case of Saddam, when I was speaking with him, he was incredibly charming.
This week, President Trump issued a statement out of the White House in which he acknowledged the heroics of the American Army during the Battle of the Bulge at the end of World War II. And what struck me about this statement by the president was, I cannot remember of a president of the United States, in a sense, going out of his way to praise American soldiers 75 years after they did their service. Do you find that this president has a particularly strong feeling for the American military and for the national security issues that he's addressing?
Oh, absolutely. This president is very, very pro-military. I will say there are other presidents. I think very highly of Ronald Reagan's speech at the 50th anniversary of D-Day. If you go back and listen to that speech, it's unbelievable. But Donald Trump President Trump very clearly, deeply admires the service and sacrifice of America's warriors and the fact that the world is free because of their blood and sweat.
Do you think, and this is using your crystal ball, that after this nonsense of impeachment is completed by the Democrats, meaning that the Senate disposes of it, do you think that there is any chance that before the 2020 election that the House Democrats will actually do something constructive for the American people?
Yeah, I think they have to now. And they are voting on USMCA, and they're doing that because they kind of have to, right? I mean, I'll give you an example. I'm in a committee tomorrow that is doing a bill markup and voting on bills in my oversight committee. The last time we did that was June in that committee. So they're now in a rush to get some things done in this last week, and it's to try to show that they actually are governing. We know they're not. We know we've lost so much time on things like USMCA. But that's their modus operandi. They have to go out there and do that now.
Do you, as a congressman, and you represent a district in the state of Tennessee, what are your top 3 priorities in terms of issues and things that you feel that are on top of your list to get accomplished as Congress?
Well, obviously, if you're talking about legislatively, as a freshman, that's not that significant. If you're talking globally about what I want to see happen in government, that's different. Legislatively, obviously, I'm pushing a lot of pro-veteran legislation. I'm pushing pro-rural hospital legislation, trying to save our rural hospitals because it's really too much government interference that's the problem, and not, some of the liberals are out there saying we got to, spend more money. That's not the issue. What we've got to do is create a fair marketplace and let them thrive. But it's bills like that, using my military history or my military experience, my business experience, my physician's experience. I did pass a bill on the House floor that redesigns the Homeland Security's intelligence gathering, analysis, and distribution process. Again, using my military experience to kind of influence what happens at Homeland Security. So it's bills like that. That's a great example of what I plan to be doing.
And globally, what do you think should be done, and what's your opinion on the most important issues from your perspective?
I think the division, the divisiveness in the country is probably our biggest concern, and the only way to fix it is to go back to federalism, to what the founders intended at the beginning, and that was to let the local governments and state governments make almost all of the decisions, except for what was enumerated in the Constitution. And that way, if California wants to be, a universal health and have Medicaid for all, and fine, they can do that. Tennessee will do healthcare its way. But if you have a divided House of Representatives like this, where the party in charge makes all the decisions, that's essentially tyranny, and I don't think Americans are going to tolerate that. And so I find it. I think our only hope is to get back to states' rights.
Well,
that's probably the number one issue.
Go ahead. What other issues concern you?
Well, we've got to get our spending, under control. We are bankrupting the country. And this labor minibus from yesterday was a fine example of that. If we do not get our spending under control, it won't matter because we won't be a country. We'll be broke. So clearly that's got to happen.
Okay. Look, I agree with you on both of these are extremely important issues, and the federalism issue is something that's near and dear to our hearts. And as a matter of fact, one of your colleagues is a great proponent of that, which is Chip Roy from Texas. And,
yes.
And federalism is in every fiber of this body in terms of returning to what the founders perceived that this country how it should be governed. Look, Congressman, I know that today is a very busy day. I want to thank you for the time that you spent with us, and I also would like to thank you for the service that you've done for the country and you continue to do for the country. And I want to invite you to come on to Secure America's Now Code Red broadcast and update us as your career goes on and as the country goes through what I think is a positive revolution after impeachment is disposed of.
Well, thanks for having me on the podcast, and call anytime.
Fantastic. Well, if you can take the time today as doing impeachment, I take you at your word, and we will. Thank you very much, Congressman Mark Green.
Have a great day, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you for listening to Code Red with Secure America Now. We are the largest national security digital platform in the nation, dedicated to bringing critical security issues to the forefront of the American debate. For more information, visit our website at www.secureamericanow.org.
Don't miss a single Code Red podcast. Subscribe today on Spotify, iTunes, or Podbean. You can also find the Code Red podcast on YouTube.